So the other day on stream, we were talking about the topic that is in the title of this video. How do you fix Koyan Dark? How do we make this servant really, really good? And we were yapping away, I was giving some of my suggestions. People in the chat were also giving their suggestions as well. And the more I thought about it on making an actual video proper, because I do have a series that I would like to kind of get back to called the Hotfix series on this channel, where we go back and we look at some of these servants that could really use a buff, or just talk about a way that we can make a servant better than they already are. And I was thinking that, well, Koyan Dark could be a really good candidate for that video. But the more that I thought about it over the last couple of days in preparation for making that video, the thing that I realized is that Koyan Dark herself isn't actually all that bad. I think the reason people think she needs a buff, or they think that she's not super great, is because Coan exists, and she just happens to do a lot of the same things that you would want to use Koyan Dark for. They are both Buster AoE foreigner farmers that also happen to have the Earth attribute power mod on their NP, but unfortunately, Coan just does more damage and has an additional power mod against threat against humanity, so whenever that does come up, it just makes her a little bit better because there's even more stages that she's going to be good in. And then she actually has some pretty good survivability because she could turn any invincibility buffs that she gets into solemn defense, which is still pretty much like the best defensive buff that you can get in the game because nobody can really bypass it outside of just straight up removing it off of your servant. But the more that I thought about it, and I just really think about all the team comps that I use Koyan Dark in, they wouldn't really work if Koyan Dark wasn't in that team comp, right? Like, you really do specifically need her to get some of these characters to work. I mean, I think the simplest thing that they could do if they wanted to help out Koyan Dark and they wanted to kind of squash the narrative that she's not super great is simply just give her an NP damage buff. In that, whenever you rank up a character's NP, the scaling for said NP actually goes up a little bit. And then you could also have that attack buff that she gets on her NP be for 3 turns instead of for 1 turn. So effectively, she would have some way of ramping up her damage as she fires subsequent NPs, and her base damage would go up a little bit, meaning that it wouldn't feel like she's getting completely blown out of the water by somebody like Oberon, or not Oberon, but Coan with Oberon, right? Because when I look at Koyan Dark's skill set, she is doing a lot of very, very powerful things that not a whole lot of other servants are able to do at her level. I mean, sure, you do have servants that are able to charge the party's NP gauge, right? But she gives a 30% battery to the entire party while also giving them a 30% buster buff. This is really crucial for one of my favorite team comps right now, which consists of both Ace the Savior, Koyan Dark, and then kind of your dealer's choice of whatever other Buster AoE servant you want to use. Ironically enough, I do actually use Coan for that, because not only can she do a lot of damage on her own, but having a targetable 50% battery does actually help out depending on what the setup is demanding at the time. So if you want to go for more Ace the Savior NPs, you can do that. If you want Coan to do 1 or 2 NPs, you can do that. Or if you're feeling a little quirky, you can let Koyan Dark do it, because hey, there's going to be some times where Koyan Dark has, say, event power mod and Coan or Ace doesn't, right? So there are going to be scenarios where you do want to give her all the NP and let her do all the damage. But really, it is the second skill that is the bread and butter, because even though, you can give the party, the battery and the damage, that's not a unique thing. Other characters can do stuff along those lines. But the second skill being a targetable overcharge of 2 stages is absolutely crazy. Because in this team comp that I like to run, because it's pretty much what I've been running to just kind of clear all the content in the game as of late, this can be tailored around what you want to do in the team comp. So if you want to focus on Ace, you could obviously give this to her. That lets her pretty much immediately get access to her third skill, which gives everybody a 50% battery, big NP damage, and if you're doing, say, a challenge quest or something, everybody also gets a guts. I mean, that's just incredibly powerful. When Ace is also already giving everybody NP every single turn and is like generating stars, it just is a really strong 1-2 punch. But there are times where I need the extra power mod damage. I mean, look at Koyan Dark herself. She gets Earth power mod on her overcharge, and so you can overcharge that by 2 stages, so you could really get in there to start doing some mondo damage against the enemies. Or again, even for somebody like Coan, if you want to default over to her, Koyan Dark actually works rather well with Coan in being able to give her additional damage on top of the additional battery and the buster damage. And sure, while, she does have a pretty specific charisma in that, you have to have an animal characteristic servant to gain access to that 30% attack and that 30% defense. That I kind of see as more of a bonus whenever it does come up. If you want to slot somebody that actually does have those characteristics into the team, it's a nice bonus if you want to fully take advantage of it. But the other thing that I was more so thinking, and the way that I use Koyan Dark was something that I would like to see buffed, is probably her third skill in some way, because this is not a bad skill, but say in the way that her first first and second skill have some really good party utility. It makes her really good as a pseudo offensive slash supporting type servant. This doesn't really do anything, at least initially, because the Pierce Invul for herself and the 50% crit damage does mean she can actually do some pretty decent crits, and then whenever she attacks, she could put either poison, curse, or burn on the enemy, which can be really nice if you're trying to proc additional power mods. Say for, I don't know, whatever reason, you're using her with Semiramis on your team, right? Semiramis needs the enemies to be poisoned, and so effectively any of your Koyan Dark command cards that you get would proc her power mod. That's just really strong. That's a really good utility thing to have. But then it really over specializes into that by then also hitting them with Toxic, Evil Curse, and Spread of Fire, which basically just say, oh, well, you're going to do a little bit more burn damage, a little bit more curse damage, and a little bit more poison damage, which does have its uses. There are some boss fights where, you know, particularly like the Summer Crab boss fights that we get once every blue moon, or something that is styled in that similar framework where the characters have like a 99% damage reduction and they're like, you gotta use damage over time if you want to beat these guys. It's really nice for stuff like that, but I would like to see this tailored in a way that does help her out and at least being that kind of pseudo team support slash DPS. Now, I know something that a lot of people do not like about Koyan Sky is the fact that her second skill is specifically on a 7-turn cooldown, because that does get it to the point where it can be a little bit rough in trying to re-loop it back with, say, Koyan Sky of Light. We do have the new buff for the append skills where now you can kind of get the cooldowns down a little bit faster, which is good, but not everybody's going to have the ability to max out all of their characters' append skills. For the most part, it does seem like most players are going to be going for, you know, their one copy of a servant, you know, maybe they'll bond them up and then they'll probably get something like mono-loading and then call it a day, or they're going to spend their coins grailing their character, in which it's going to be very unlikely that they ever get some of those append skills until like years after when they initially pulled for them. So something that I would like to see her get is something that kind of makes her a little bit more self-sufficient, not needing to go that append skill route. So I think if you wanted to, you could have Koyan Dark over here kind of borrow one of Tamamo's effects, in that her third skill, if you really wanted to make her, say, more of a pseudo support slash DPS, you could, for one, let the Pierce Invul and the crit damage be targetable, because again, I think you could let her do that and it'd be really, really strong. Or you could give that to somebody else if you need them to do some face card damage. That just seems like some nice added bits of utility. But then you could give her something like a skill cooldown reduction on that targeted ally of, say, like 1. That seems probably pretty reasonable. I think if you really wanted to go sick nasty with it, you could do by 2, because Koyan Light already does that, and I mean, Koyan Dark is just the beast version of Koyan Light, so they probably should have the same ability of being able to reduce that cooldown. I think that could be very, very helpful for her, and not only getting her own skills back, but also in assisting other people in being able to get their skills off cooldown as well. Might be a little bit dangerous, because then you could have 3 characters, 3 different Koyan Skies that are all able to give that cooldown reduction on their skills, which might allow for some nonsense when it comes to looping things. But I also think this opens up a type of multi-core buster farming, because functionally, Koyan Dark's first skill is kind of like what Castoria does, in the way that it's giving the entire party that 30% battery, and that's what opens up Arts to being able to do multi-core farming so well. If Koyan Dark just gets a little bit of a push, I think that could also push her into allowing Buster to do easier multi-core farming, which she can't really do with Koyan Light because she has one dedicated 50% battery. It's kind of hard to do the multi-core when you can't really spread the NP around to everybody else. So something like that I think could be very helpful. It could also, if you're really crazy, give somebody a 20% battery or have a self 20% battery. I think I would prefer that, because then she doesn't become too much of a dedicated support, and then I think she would kind of lose her identity as a servant a little bit. So if you give her, like, say, a self 20% battery, that means with her first and third skill, she has a total for 50%, and does help her be a little bit more self-sufficient. And then if you allow her to do the same gimmick as her Koyan Light variant, it does give her some really nice utility between being able to lower the skill cooldown and overcharge characters' NP. I mean, that would be really invaluable. And for some people, it might seem a little bit tame. You know, they want to see her be doing millions upon millions of damage, which isn't impossible, right? You could buff her NP. You could also just give her, I don't know, NP damage on her NP as well. You let that stack with the attack buff as well. And then sure, she would do like monstrous amounts of damage, but I just don't believe that's what they want Koyan Dark to do. I almost view it as kind of a statement when they put out Kukulkan, that they're like, no, we want you to use this character for the DPS, and we want you to use Koyan Dark as a little bit of a utility character, character, right? Someone that can do some pretty respectable damage. You can use them in CQs, you can use them for farming, but if you really want to be doing Mondo damage to people, we want you to use Coan. Like, I do kind of believe that that is the case. And so while it wouldn't be impossible to make her like, oh, you could do way more damage than Coan, I don't think that's something they want to do. I also don't think that's very healthy for the game if we're going to have a bunch of characters trying to compete for this maximum amount of damage on these AoE characters, because the higher our characters are able to hit, the harder the quests are going to be, right? You know, we're going to get 90 plus at this point. And then that just doesn't seem like a really good environment for, say, like the average player to be in, because that just seems like it's going to be very frustrating, because 90 plus is already at a spot where it's doable for most players, but for a lot of them, it's going to be getting down to like, oh, I have to make a very specific setup for each event that comes out, which I think is a little bit fun, but can also understand it being a little frustrating. I mean, we spent like an hour and a half on stream trying to get a team set up, you know, for the JP 90++, and then, I mean, you guys probably saw the recording. As soon as I loaded into it, I was like, oh yeah, I practiced this like 8 different times. You know, I had this run down pat. We were ready to go. And then as soon as, you know, hit the record button, it's like, now nobody wants to crit. Nobody wants to actually do damage. Everyone wants to do minimum damage. I can't imagine trying to do that with like a 90+++ event, you know? So it's in my belief that I think they should probably keep Koyan Dark in the role that she's in, but help her do that role a bit better, because trying to compete with people like Coan in terms of damage, I mean, there's no point in trying to do that. But I mean, she'll always have more utility than Coan does. That is something that I've always believed, because sure, Coan can donate the 50% battery, she can give everybody the little attack buff, but it's not doing nearly as much as what Koyan Dark is doing over here just on her second skill alone. And as an enjoyer of weird and odd team comps, I will always take a 30% party-wide battery over just a singular 50% battery. You could just do so much more when everybody's getting 30% than one person is getting 50%. I mean, if you even think about it mathematically, one of them is basically giving 90% battery while one is giving 50%. Like, one is offering a little bit more. So with that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'd like to get my Koyan Dark fans coming out on this one as well, and just let me know what you guys think. Are you convinced that, you know, she should try to stay in this like utility tech support area, where I do think she would do rather well, and I would like to see her kind of thrive in that sector? Or would you like to see her just become a Mondo DPS that just blows everything up in the game? Let me know that in the comment section down below, and as per usual, leave a like on the video, subscribe for more, as I do upload these videos every single day. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Peace, late guys.